A millionaire, a wildly successful business, a penthouse, a mansion he barely lives in, a garage full of luxury cars, and more women vying for his attention than he can keep track of. Daniel Carter has everything money can buy. What he doesn't have? A single person who knew him before any of it existed. 12 years ago, he had $11 and a wife who believed in him for free. Then he got rich and traded her in like she was the outdated model. Let's find out exactly what that cost him. But first, welcome to Fresh Start Stories, inspiring stories about life, change, and the courage to begin again. Like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Daniel Carter met Rachel before there was anything impressive about him. No company, no expensive watch, no assistant running his calendar. Just Daniel, 27, sitting across from her in a diner with $11 left in his checking account. Rachel ordered coffee instead of dinner the moment she noticed him quietly doing the math on whether he could afford both meals. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I like coffee," she said. They both knew she was lying. 3 years later, they were married, in an apartment where the pipes complained every morning and the windows rattled every time a truck went by. Rachel taught elementary school by day and worked 2 evenings a week at a bookstore. Daniel was trying to build a logistics software company from their kitchen table, and most nights she fell asleep to the sound of him typing. Some mornings he woke up to breakfast next to his laptop and a note that just said, "Keep going." When his company made nothing, she paid the rent. When his car broke down, she took the bus so he could have hers for meetings. When investors said no, she sat through the same pitch in their living room over and over until he could give it without looking at his notes. She wasn't just his wife. She was the person standing beside the dream before there was a single piece of evidence it would ever work. Then slowly, it did. 1 client became 5. 5 became 20. Daniel hired his first employee, then 10, then 50. By 38, he'd stopped explaining his company at networking events. People already knew who he was. They left the apartment with the rattling windows, then the modest house after that, and eventually moved into a home overlooking the city. Rachel finally stopped working extra shifts. Daniel told her she deserved to rest. At first, success just made life easier. Then, quietly, it started making Daniel different. Not all at once. It happened in rooms Rachel never particularly enjoyed. Fundraisers, investor dinners, rooftop parties where everyone seemed to know the price of everyone else's watch. Daniel learned to move through those rooms like he'd been born in them. Rachel never did. She still wore dresses she'd owned for years, forgot the names of expensive wines, and once laughed and admitted at dinner that she barely understood her own retirement account. Daniel used to love that about her, that she never pretended. Now, more and more, he found himself wishing she would. At an awards dinner where Daniel himself was being honored, Rachel showed up in a simple navy dress. Around the room, one executive's wife was 29 and discussing venture capital like a professional. Another had 500,000 followers. Another had just been in a magazine. Daniel looked back at Rachel, deep in conversation with a waiter about his daughter's college applications, and felt something for the first time in 12 years of marriage that he would later be ashamed to admit: embarrassment. On the drive home, Rachel noticed his silence. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "You sure?" He looked out the window. "Sometimes I just wish you'd make more of an effort at these things." Her face changed. An effort. He didn't explain. Explaining would have meant saying the thought he'd started having more and more. Maybe I've outgrown her. A year later, Daniel asked for a divorce. There was no affair, no secret girlfriend, no dramatic confrontation, which somehow made it worse. Rachel sat across from him, trying to understand why the man she'd spent 12 years building a life with no longer wanted that life. "Is there someone else?" "No." "Did I do something?" "No." "Then what happened?" "I've changed," he said, searching for words that would make it sound less cruel. "And I haven't?" she asked. He told her that wasn't what he meant. She nodded slowly. "No, I think it is." Daniel told himself he wasn't abandoning her. He was simply admitting they'd become different people. Rachel didn't fight him, didn't beg, didn't remind him what she'd sacrificed. She signed the papers, and when she moved out, she took almost nothing from the life he'd built. For the first few months, Daniel felt lighter. No compromises, no explaining a late dinner, no guilt over another business trip. His penthouse was immaculate. His life looked exactly like the magazines. And women noticed. Sophia was 27, beautiful, effortlessly comfortable in his world. She knew the best restaurants in Monaco, owned a suitcase just for weekend trips, and photographed champagne before drinking it. With Sophia, Daniel never felt embarrassed. For a while, he mistook being admired together for being loved. Then, out of curiosity more than anything, Daniel told Sophia his company was in trouble. Nothing dramatic, just that investors were nervous and he might lose most of what he'd built. Sophia went quiet. Her messages got shorter. The following week, she canceled a trip they'd planned. 3 days later, a text arrived. "I think we want different things." No fight, no betrayal. She simply disappeared from a life that only interested her while it looked expensive. Rachel had stayed when his account held $11. Sophia left the moment she only imagined his might hold less. Daniel decided he'd simply chosen the wrong kind of woman. Then he met Natalie, 40, a successful corporate attorney, elegant, financially independent, needing nothing from him. Finally, he thought, someone who doesn't need my money. And she didn't. That eventually became the problem. Their relationship ran like a well-managed calendar. Dinner Thursday at 7, every third Saturday together, trips booked 6 weeks out. If he canceled, she made other plans. Nobody sacrificed much of anything. Then one night, returning from London, Daniel developed sudden chest pain. It turned out to be exhaustion and dehydration, nothing dangerous, but for several hours in a hospital room, alone, he didn't know that. He texted Natalie, "I'm in the hospital. Doctors think I'm okay. Running tests." 15 minutes later, "That's scary. Let me know when you're discharged." Nothing wrong with the message, nothing cruel about it. But Daniel suddenly remembered another hospital, years earlier, before the company succeeded. Pneumonia, no decent insurance, and Rachel sleeping upright for 2 nights in a plastic chair beside him, using her coat as a blanket. He'd woken at 3 a.m. once and whispered, "You should go home." She'd barely opened her eyes. "You are home." He hadn't thought of that sentence in years. Now he couldn't stop hearing it. Natalie wasn't cruel. She simply didn't love him the way Rachel once had, and from a hospital bed, independence and indifference had started to look strangely similar. After Natalie came others, younger, older, entrepreneurs, a doctor, a gallery owner, a woman in Paris, a woman at a Chicago charity dinner. Every one of them had something Rachel never had. More glamour, more ambition, more fluency in his new world. And after every single one ended, Daniel felt the same strange absence. These women knew Daniel Carter, founder, CEO, the name on the conference program. Only Rachel had ever known Dan, the 29-year-old at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, certain his business was about to fail, before confidence became part of his wardrobe, before people laughed at his jokes because he signed their paychecks. And slowly, a frightening thought took shape. Every woman he dated had something Rachel didn't. None of them had what Rachel had. Not the kind of history measured in anniversaries. The kind built from knowing someone before they learned how to hide their fear. 6 years after the divorce, Daniel finally sold the first house he and Rachel had owned, long since rented out and mostly forgotten. While workers cleared the attic, one of them handed him a cardboard box. "Think this is yours." Inside, old grocery receipts, photographs, birthday cards, a broken Christmas ornament, Rachel's handwriting on almost everything. And then a bank statement he almost threw away without reading. The date was from the company's first year, a month he remembered vividly, days from running out of money entirely, when cash had appeared out of nowhere to keep the business alive until the first major contract came through. He'd always remembered it as a lucky break he'd somehow arranged himself, but the account number wasn't his. It was Rachel's, money her mother had left her when she died, nearly all of it withdrawn and quietly poured into keeping his company alive. She had never told him. Sitting on the attic floor, surrounded by a life he'd once considered too small for the man he'd become, Daniel understood something he'd spent years getting backwards. There might never have been a company to build at all without her. It took him another month to work up the nerve to find her. Not through social media, through a small local newspaper article, "Teacher opens neighborhood bakery after 20-year dream." He read the headline 3 times. Rachel had once kept a notebook of recipes and talked about a tiny place with blue chairs and cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings, a dream that had quietly become someday the moment his company took over their lives. He had completely forgotten. She hadn't. The bakery was small, warm, nothing impressive by the standards Daniel now lived by, and somehow he felt more uncomfortable stepping through that door than he ever had walking into boardrooms worth hundreds of millions. Rachel was behind the counter, laughing at something, older now, of course, but lighter, easier in her own skin than he remembered. An ordinary-looking man in rolled-up sleeves was stacking chairs by the window. No expensive watch, no polished confidence, nothing that belonged in Daniel's world at all. Rachel's smile faded when she saw him, but she didn't look angry. "Daniel." "Hi." They talked after closing. He apologized. Not the polished version he'd rehearsed in the car, but the real one, messy and incomplete. He told her about the bank statement. She only smiled, a little sadly. "I wondered if you'd ever find that." "Why didn't you tell me?" "What difference would it have made?" "It would have made every difference." She shook her head. "No. Back then I didn't want credit. I wanted us to make it." He glanced toward the man by the window. "Are you happy?" She thought about it. "I am." "With him?" She followed his eyes, then smiled, not cruelly, almost kindly. "No, Daniel." She looked around at the blue chairs, the handwritten menu, the life she'd finally built entirely for herself. "I'm happy with myself. He just gets to be part of it." There was nothing left to argue with, nothing to negotiate, nothing he could buy his way back into. That night, Daniel went home to the penthouse. He hadn't lost the company, hadn't lost the fortune. No bankruptcy waiting, no scandal, no punishment anyone else could ever see. His company had just posted its best year yet, and his wine collection alone was worth more than his first car. 3 messages sat on his phone. A woman from a fundraiser, someone asking if he'd be in Miami that weekend, a third that simply read, "Drinks tonight?" Daniel set the phone face down. The apartment went completely silent, and for the first time, success finished teaching him the one lesson it had taken years to land. There is a difference between being wanted and being loved. People wanted his attention, his name, his access, his lifestyle. Rachel had wanted him back when none of that existed at all. He had spent years becoming the kind of man everyone wanted to know, and lost, somewhere along the way, the only woman who had loved him back when there was nothing impressive to know. Maybe success doesn't change everyone. Sometimes it just reveals what we start believing we deserve. And sometimes, so busy looking for someone more beautiful, more successful, more exciting, we fail to notice the person already standing beside us while life was still ordinary. The one whose staying was never proof that we'd settled. Sometimes they were the reason we ever got the chance to become more at all. And by the time we finally understand what they were worth, they may have already learned it themselves, with or without us. If Daniel's story reminded you that the people who loved you before the world noticed you are worth holding on to, subscribe. We've got more stories like this one waiting for you.